Good afternoon. I'm kind of wondering whether some of you wonder why we're even having this conversation in a way, because so many of you are digitally connected. I can see people tweeting in real time, and so you should. That's kind of the way of the world. If you just take my own life, I checked this morning. I think I'm a member of 14 WhatsApp groups. You might use WhatsApp out there. 2 daughters at university, and it's kind of the ideal tool for staying in touch. I probably use WhatsApp to communicate with them more than anyone else. I've got WhatsApp groups for a little research group, the cricket league, the badminton team, the little badminton league. And you get little surprises there. One of the guys in the badminton league learned about his impending divorce first on the WhatsApp group, which was really entertaining for the rest of us, I must admit. So you do get some difficult surprises along the way if you're prepared to engage. But we're all there. We're all connected using these different tools. So why are we even here having the discussion? What's such a surprise about the tech industry? We're all professionals. We all use this stuff. But actually, we are where we are. And the question for us as a community, and TSA in particular, is what are we doing to address the imbalance? Paul very nicely launched the white paper this morning, as we called it, Connecting People, Improving Lives, a Digital Future for Technology-Enabled Care. And notice a little question mark on the end, implying that we've got to take some action collectively for this to work. So I want to share a little bit with you around a little bit more detail about what have we done to get where we are and what are the actions sitting behind that. Hugh already described the impending change, and everyone's using this 2020-25 timeline, and maybe that's right, maybe it's earlier, maybe a little later. Nevertheless, this is inevitable. The telecoms infrastructure is going to go to digital, away from the familiar, I mean, copper's long gone, but the familiar end-to-end phone line connection that we're used to is not going to be there anymore. And we hear that very loudly in the working group that Hugh very usefully chairs with the telecommunications providers. And we know that, as we heard earlier, most systems that connect over those networks, if they use this audible voice band signaling, are going to be affected to some degree or other. And what we're discussing today is trying to get ahead of the game. Carl-Johan described the circumstances in Sweden. They hit this problem some while ago and had to grapple quite successfully with the solution. The question is, what are we going to do in the UK? Last year, TSA engaged in some it was probably overly technical, but a lot of detailed debate around what's the real impact of some of these changes. What's happened during this calendar year is we're trying to bring that to life in terms of service impact. So all the way through this year, there have been various consultation events. Probably the biggest single event was the think tank that we ran back in May. And much thanks there to the Innovation Agency and PA Consulting for supporting that event to go ahead. And forgive me if I've missed any of the other sponsors, but it was a very stimulating day. We had over 50 attendees right the way across the spectrum, from users to NHS commissioners and everyone in between. And it looked at lots of viewpoints, as you see on the screen here. I'm not going to labour the point as to what they were, but you can imagine we had to challenge this problem set from different scenarios. And we did take input from Sweden, as we heard earlier, but also from Scotland. They're a little bit ahead of the game here, and they're already commissioning various studies into the problem set. And it's that think tank that's largely informed the work since then that's arrived at the white paper that hopefully you've all got copies of now. So let's just talk about Scotland, which is where we were focusing our efforts originally. We were alerted by the team in Falkirk. I think the colleagues from Falkirk are here during the next couple of days, so please do grab them and learn of their experience. But what they were saying was that during a period when one of the major telecommunications providers made change to their infrastructure, they moved to this next generation digital infrastructure. That coincided with a serious ramp in the number of failure rates of alarm calls. It went up to over 14% of those alarm calls. Remember what Carl-Johan said about Sweden. When they got to 20%, we were starting to have a different type of conversation about fatalities. We don't want to get to that world. We want to be ahead of that conversation here. And it wasn't just Scotland. This was nationwide. Right at the other end of the map, Apello are sitting there delivering services in Dorset. And of course, Dorset, you have quite an aged population, quite an aging community with very many people supported by Apello, around about 200,000 users. And they saw a doubling of the alarm failure rates over just a one-year period from 2016 to 17. So this is real. We're starting to get into territory where we really need to pay attention and solve the problem. So that really brought things to home in terms of the white paper discussion. So there is that half of the story, which is the threat. That's not going to go away in the sense we have to solve a particular negatively disruptive problem, which of course is why you'll see these sort of graphics in the white paper and elsewhere. We're talking about 1.5 or 1.7 million older and vulnerable clients exposed to that threat, connect over a phone line, and what happens if we disrupt that service that's delivered by 240 or so monitoring centres, if we've got to get to the solution by 2025. That's the balancing equation which is threat related. But probably more interesting is we need to be on the front foot here. We're not just responding to a problem. The reason the telecoms providers are delivering this change is for all our good benefit, and we need to be taking advantage of that. And you'll see lots of commentary around society, but also here at the ITEC conference, you'll see lots of providers who are using digital or internet protocol connectivity to good effect. And you'll see lots of commentary around what you can do with big data analytics, reduce waiting times, councils connecting with different services in new ways. And of course, you heard Paul talk earlier today about the shift to multiple connected devices around the home and people's daily lives to good effect. From, I think you mentioned it was going to go from an average of 8 devices to more like 30. These are billions of devices worldwide providing rich data sets. Because the question is, what do you do with all that information? How do you use it intelligently? Perhaps the aspect of that new world that's closest to home for telecare is the Internet of Things. And I would encourage you to spend time with some of the providers in the stands out there that are today delivering care services using IoT applications. If you pick your way through that puzzle, the threat and the balancing upside, the positive possibilities, we came to 6 conclusions, and Paul touched on these today. I'm going to try and dive into one or two of the actions that sit behind these. The headline conclusions were, well, firstly, the shift is inevitable. It's going to happen. So we need some plan of action that means we minimize the disruption, but also make sure we don't miss the digital opportunity, the WhatsApp group equivalent that comes with that. That means that we providing services in the care community need to stay alive to this consumer expectation, new technology, new service. What can we do with that data? We're also recognizing that if within that we're delivering life-critical services or life-impacting services in some way, we're probably going to have to evolve the regulatory practice and the guidance that goes with these systems and services. I think it was Hugh talking about new failure modes. You know, if you rely upon a broadband connection, your power goes down in your home, you don't have that service anymore. So you need some other diverse way of connecting with your alarm receiving center or your family members and so on. That's a different way of looking at the system or service requirement. And you only had to look at the telecommunications map that Hugh provided to see that this is actually quite a complex world. Multiple telecommunications operators, multiple service providers, and all of us as stakeholders in between. So collaboration and alignment of what we do and clear communication across that is pretty vital to the next few steps that we take. The last point we concluded was there is going to be a cost here. We're going to have to make some change to some parts of that estate. And if nothing else, there will be new ongoing communications charges that go with that IP-connected world. So let's be prepared for that impact. So what we're closing with is a set of recommendations in the white paper. And here I want to just dive in. You probably want to just see a little bit more about, in practice, what are we going to do? What sits behind those headlines? Because they're probably fairly obvious as headlines. The first item on there is that we want a roadmap. Well, what do we mean by that? Obviously, a key part of that is what Hugh and Ofcom touched on, which is we need clear communication around the telecommunications infrastructure change. When is it happening? Where is it happening? What's the impact on me? What are the failure modes? How many of our systems will be affected? And perhaps just as interesting, what are these emergent IP digital solutions, the art of the possible, let's feature into that. If we can grapple with that quite complex puzzle, we want to make sure that we can work with the service provider community to get an agreed roadmap. So who's actually going to do what and where and when? Let's not wait for this to be a problem set that's done and to us. We can't get too far through this without addressing that issue around regulation and guidance. even identifying all of the affected standards and regulations and guidance material is itself not a small task. And we're looking to work with various partners, people like NHS Digital in that. And that leads to two subsidiary actions. One, of course, is that some of those regulatory standards themselves have to evolve. I mentioned the example about how systems might need to be built differently to be reliable in a life-critical environment. But let's be honest, these standards are not quick to create. And a clever way to fill the void in the timescales is to work on the guidance material. We're used to that. We've got things like quality standards frameworks. We need to make sure that we're giving good guidance to the service providers, technology providers, users, as we go through this journey. When we talk about new commercial models, I guess we're thinking about two things here. One is we are creating the opportunity for new types of technology that families and consumers are more familiar with. Maybe it's a hackneyed example, but dropping an Amazon Echo into your life is one possibility. But that sort of technology is, I know from my own family experience, is the sort of technology where you might be willing to share the cost. So there are new opportunities for part pay, co-pay consumer models rather than necessarily state pay. And as you heard from the Swedish experience with Carl Johan again, a very different commercial model appeared in Sweden where you've got a different type of way of commissioning services rather than procurement of technology, and it completely disrupted and probably to good effect created a new commercial model even within the local authority purchasing framework. So new commercial models need identifying, instructing, communicating. We can't get away from the funding story, and the subsidiary actions in there, no surprise. One is we need to baseline these costs. Exactly how many systems are affected and when? What is going to be the cost of change? And the companion to that is a lobbying plan to make sure we identify the transitional funding. You know, how can we as service providers maintain continuity unless we've got some sort of resource and funding to support that task? The last two, I think, are inevitable. We've described quite a complex environment here with a fairly significant disruption, and you can choose your own position as to whether you see it as a negative or a positive disruption. I'm in the latter camp. But to navigate that complex landscape, it's going to need pretty strong leadership. And if you find time to read through the white paper, you'll see what we mean by that. We try to identify different strands of the problem and who might be able to take a lead position. TSA is not without responsibilities there, for example, in terms of the regulatory frameworks. But please find time to read that through. And the whole lot comes back to a clear and well-communicated plan. Not just feeding communication out, but managing the program, bringing those strands together to make sure that we collectively understand what's happening when and what are the opportunities. How can we access funding, procure new services and technology? Which led to this. So please find time to pick your way through the white paper. And we'd love to hear your comments. We desperately need to know whether we're telling the full and correct story here before we leap into those follow-on actions. And by all means, feel free to drop an email to myself, which would come up on the next slide if I can make it work. There we go. And that's me done. Thank you very much.